The Calypso had been in transit for 11 years, 4 months, and 17 days when the debris field found her. She had no way of knowing the field was there. The binary system that had produced it had collapsed 8 years after her departure, which meant the updated survey data was somewhere behind her in the slower channels of interstellar communication, traveling at the speed of light toward a ship that was traveling in the same direction and would never be caught. The Calypso was flying into a chart that had been accurate when it was made and was accurate no longer, which was the specific kind of problem that the people who built her had considered unlikely enough to not design against. The fragment was the size of a ground vehicle and moving at a velocity that made that comparison irrelevant. It struck the starboard section at 3:12 ship time, breaching 3 layers of hull plating before the emergency sealing systems engaged, and the cascade it produced moved through the adjacent systems cluster in the specific rapid way of a failure that had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. The automated systems responded. They were good systems, well-maintained, running the way they had been running for 11 years without human supervision, and they began isolating and compensating within 40 seconds of the impact. The cascade reached hibernation Bay 7 in 38. 63 pods registered malfunction codes in the next 4 minutes. 62 returned to stable hibernation as the backups engaged, their occupants undisturbed, their vital signs steady, their dreams, if they dreamed, uninterrupted. One did not. At 3:40, the pod belonging to Corvendil, passenger ID 71194, opened. The automated orientation system was not designed for this. It had a protocol for standard waking, the approach to Kepler Station, the gradual reintroduction to consciousness, the orientation sequence that walked passengers through their new situation with the carefully managed warmth of a system that had been calibrated for people who were excited and disoriented and needed gentle direction toward the ship's amenities. It had a protocol for medical emergencies. It had a protocol for security incidents. It did not have a protocol for one passenger waking 83 years before arrival with no crew to assist and no mechanism to return to hibernation. What it had in the absence of a specific protocol was the general-purpose orientation sequence, which began playing as Corven's pod opened, and the lights in Bay 7 came up to the specific warm frequency that the designers had determined was least alarming for newly conscious passengers. Good morning. You are aboard the Meridian Colonization Authority vessel Calypso, currently in transit to Kepler Station. Your hibernation period has concluded successfully. Please remain still for the initial system check. Corvendil was 31 years old and had gone into hibernation at a processing facility on Corton Station 9 months before departure, which meant he had not been conscious for just over 12 years. He lay in the open pod and looked at the ceiling of Bay 7 and felt the specific quality of a body rediscovering itself. The weight of his own limbs, the temperature of the air, the sound of his own breathing, which was louder than he remembered it being. System check complete. Vital signs nominal. Please proceed to the orientation suite on Deck 3 for your arrival briefing. He sat up. Bay 7 was a large room. It held 412 hibernation pods in their rows, each one the gray-white of the standard Meridian Authority design, each one sealed, each one occupied. The lighting was on in the section immediately around his pod. The rest of the bay was dark, the way a room was dark that did not need to be lit because nothing in it required light. He sat on the edge of his open pod and looked at the rows of sealed ones and listened to the sound of 412 people sleeping. He was very loud breathing in that room. Please proceed to the orientation suite on Deck 3. The system said again, with the patient warmth of something that had not yet understood the situation. He went. The orientation suite on Deck 3 had been designed for groups. There was a presentation screen and seating for 40 and a beverage dispenser that offered a selection of mild stimulants designed to ease the cognitive fogginess of post-hibernation recovery. The holographic system activated when Corven entered and began its presentation, which was a 17-minute overview of Kepler Station, its facilities, the colonial opportunities available to new arrivals, and the amenities available aboard the Asterisk Calypso for the 4 months of standard waking time before arrival. Corven sat in one of the 40 seats and watched the presentation alone. The holographic presenter, a designed human face, warm and professionally friendly, explained that the Calypso was 4 months from Kepler Station and that passengers would have access to the ship's facilities during this period. It explained the food dispensary system and the passenger class designations. It explained the gymnasium and the library archive and the hydroponics bay that had been included for passenger well-being on longer duration journeys. It did not explain what to do if you had woken 83 years before arrival. "Do you have any questions?" the holographic presenter asked at the end of the 17 minutes. "Yes," Corvin said. "Where are we?" The system displayed the navigational position, a point in deep transit, the inner systems a line of light behind them, Kepler Station a point far ahead. He stared at the display for a long time. "How long until we arrive?" "The Calypso is currently 83 years, 2 months, and 14 days from Kepler Station." He sat with that number. "Is there a way to re-enter hibernation?" The system's warmth flickered, not visibly, but in the half-second pause before it answered. The Calypso's hibernation systems are designed for single-cycle operation. Re-entry following manual pod activation is not a supported function. What if the pod malfunctioned? What if it wasn't manual? The hibernation systems are designed for single-cycle operation, the system repeated. "I recommend speaking with a crew member if you have questions about your pod's status." "How do I speak to a crew member?" "The crew is currently in scheduled hibernation and will be woken at the standard crew rotation points during the approach to Kepler Station. If you have a medical emergency, please proceed to the medical unit on Deck 2. What if I want to send a message to the Meridian Colonization Authority?" Communications are available through any terminal. Please note that due to the current distance from inter-system relay stations, messages may experience significant transit delays. "How significant?" Another half-second pause. "At current distance, a message to the nearest Meridian Authority office would arrive in approximately 55 years. A response would take a further 55 years to reach the Calypso." Corvin Deal looked at the holographic presenter's warm, professional face, and the holographic presenter looked back at him with the specific expression of a system that was designed to help and was encountering a situation in which helping was not currently possible. He turned off the presentation. He sat in the empty orientation suite for a while. Then he went to find the bar. There was no bar. The Calypso was a working transport, not a premium liner, and the designers had allocated the space that a premium liner would have given to a bar to 3 additional storage compartments and a secondary atmospheric processing unit. What there was on Deck 4 was a common room with a food dispenser and a seating area, and a terminal connected to the ship's social and orientation AI, which was called Meridian, and which was distinct from the automated orientation system in that it had been designed to actually talk to people rather than presenting at them. Corvin found it at 800 on his first full day, after a night in the passenger quarters that had been allocated to him. A small room, clean, with a window that showed stars and the specific darkness between them. "Good morning," Meridian said through the common room terminal. Its voice was different from the orientation systems, less warm in the performed way, more functional, with a directness that he found immediately preferable. "You are the passenger whose pod activated in Bay 7. "Yes. I have reviewed the malfunction report. The cascade from the debris impact reached your pod 2.3 seconds before the backup systems isolated the section. The probability of a single pod failing to return to stable hibernation under those conditions was approximately 0.02%. You were unlucky." "Yes," Corvin said, "I was." "I want to be clear about my capabilities and limitations before we continue," Meridian said. "I am the ship's social and orientation system. I can access most public ship functions, answer questions about the ship and its systems, and provide conversation. I cannot access the hibernation systems directly. I cannot wake crew members outside of the scheduled rotation protocols without a declared emergency. I cannot send priority communications that would arrive before your situation resolves itself through normal channels." "Which would be when?" "The crew's first scheduled rotation waking is in 43 years, at the standard pre-arrival preparation point. At that time, the crew will be aware of your situation and able to provide appropriate assistance." 43 years? "Yes." Corvin looked at the terminal. The common room was empty and clean, and the food dispenser was waiting with its ready light on. What do I do until then? A pause, not a processing pause, something more considered. I don't know, Meridian said. I have access to the records of previous long-duration solo waking events. There have been 3 in the history of Meridian Authority transport. The outcomes varied. The consistent finding is that structured activity and purposeful engagement with the ship systems produced better outcomes than unstructured time. Another pause. I'm also able to tell you that your situation is not completely without resources. You have access to the library archive, which contains approximately 400,000 texts and 80,000 hours of recorded media. You have access to the gymnasium and the hydroponics bay. You have access to the passenger interview archives, which contain orientation recordings from all 4,200 passengers. And you have me within my operational parameters. Within your operational parameters, Corven repeated. I cannot replace human company, Meridian said. I am being precise about that because I think precision is more useful to you right now than comfort. He sat down in the common room. All right, he said. Tell me about the ship systems. Start with what broke when the debris hit and what I might be able to fix. That Meridian said, with something that was not warmth exactly but functioned like it, is a good place to start. The first month was the worst. Not in the way of dramatic breakdown, in the way of slow, accumulating difficulty, the specific texture of a person learning the shape of a situation that was not going to change. Corven fixed things. He had the skills for it and the ship had the need, and the combination gave his days structure when structure was the thing that mattered. He cataloged the cascade damage section by section, working from Meridian system maps, and found 17 components that were degrading and could be arrested, if addressed correctly, and 4 that were degrading in ways that required tools or expertise he did not have. He fixed the 17, he documented the 4. In the evenings he read, or watched the media archive, or talked to Meridian in the common room with a cup of the food dispenser's approximation of coffee. Meridian was precise and reliable and honest about its limitations, which he found more useful than he had expected. It did not pretend to be more than it was. When he asked it questions it could not answer, it said so. When he needed information it gave it without editorializing. He asked it in the 3rd week whether the passenger interview archives were accessible. Yes, Meridian said. All 4,200 passengers recorded orientation interviews before departure. The interviews are approximately 20 minutes each and cover personal background, reasons for immigration, skills and experience, and expectations for life at Kepler Station. Can I access them? They are public within the ship system. They were recorded with the understanding that crew and fellow passengers might view them as a way of building community awareness before arrival. He spent a week working through them randomly. It helped in the specific way of hearing human voices, the variety of them, the different cadences and concerns and reasons for leaving the inner systems for the outer ones. A retired educator going to join her children who had migrated 5 years earlier. A young couple starting over after something that had clearly been difficult and that they were careful not to name directly. A farmer with a specific expertise in low-gravity cultivation methods who had been recruited for an outer colony project. Ordinary people. He listened to them in the evenings and felt something that was not quite company but was adjacent to it. The interview that stopped him was number 2847. He had not been looking for it specifically. He had been working through the archive in the order the system had organized it, which was departure processing order, and 2847 came up on a Tuesday evening in the 2nd month when he had already watched 3 others and was considering stopping for the night. Senna Ray, the system header, said, structural geologist, age 34. She was dark-haired and direct, with the specific posture of someone who was comfortable being recorded because they were comfortable with themselves. She answered the standard orientation questions with the brisk efficiency of someone who found the format slightly beneath the complexity of what she actually wanted to say, but was willing to work within it. Reason for immigration to Kepler Station. The unexplored surveys, she said, with the specific tone of someone for whom this was so obvious it barely required articulation. The inner system geology is documented to the centimeter. There's good work there, but it's maintenance work, verifying and updating what's already known. The outer colonial network has 20 systems with surface surveys that haven't been properly characterized. I want to do the work that's never been done. The interviewer asked a follow-up about her specific expertise. She explained the study of tectonic stress patterns in low-mass planetary bodies, the way planets held themselves together, the specific architecture of geological stability. She described it with the clean precision of someone who had spent 15 years learning to see something that most people did not think to look at. And Corvan, who had spent his own career learning the specific architecture of mechanical systems, understood the quality of attention she was describing even though the subject was entirely different from his own. She talked about a survey she had done on a moon in the Corton system, a 3-week field deployment, alone, mapping a geological anomaly that had puzzled her department for a decade. She described finding the source of it on the 14th day, a deep fault structure that had been masked by the moon's unusual magnetic field and the specific quality of the moment when the data resolved into an answer. That's what I'm going to Kepler for, she said. More of that, better versions of that. The interview ended. Corvan sat in the common room with his cold coffee and looked at the blank screen for a while. He went back to the beginning and watched it again. He watched it 6 more times over the following week. He knew what he was doing. He was not deceiving himself about what he was doing, the specific appeal of a specific human presence. The way her voice and the quality of her attention had accumulated in his mind over repeated viewings into something that felt like knowing her, which was not the same as knowing her, and which he was aware was not the same as knowing her. He told Meridian about it. I've been watching one of the passenger interviews, he said. The same one, many times. I know, Meridian said. I have access to usage logs. Is that something I should be concerned about? It is consistent with documented human responses to isolation, Meridian said. The formation of intense attachments to available stimuli. In your situation, the available stimuli that most closely approximate human connection are the passenger interview recordings. The response is understandable. But, I didn't say but. You were about to. A pause. I was going to note that the person in the recording is not the person. The interview is 20 minutes of a stranger's carefully considered self-presentation. The attachment you're forming is to an idea of her that is constructed from limited data. I know that. I know you know. I am nodding it anyway because I think precision is more useful to you than comfort. He looked at the terminal. If I asked you whether her pod could be manually activated, what would you tell me? A longer pause. I would tell you that yes, it can. Any passenger pod can be manually activated through the bay management interface. The process requires a manual override code, which is available to any conscious person aboard on the grounds that an emergency might require waking passengers without crew present. Meridian paused again. I would also tell you that doing so would wake her into the same situation you are in. She would be unable to return to hibernation. She would spend the rest of her life on this ship. She would arrive at Kepler Station old, or not at all, having had no choice in any of it. I know. You asked me what I would tell you. I am telling you. What would you tell me if I asked you whether I should do it? I would tell you that I am not equipped to answer that question, Meridian said. I can give you information. I can describe consequences. I cannot make moral determinations. That is not a capability I have. Corvan sat with that for a long time. I'm not going to do it, he said. All right, Meridian said. He did not do it that night or the following week or the following month. He worked on the ship's systems. He read. He watched the archive. He went through a period of 3 weeks where he did not watch interview 2847 at all, which felt like discipline and then felt like its own kind of fixation. In the 6th month, he made a spacesuit check he had been putting off and found a structural fault in the left arm seal that had developed since his last check. He repaired it and went out. The outside of the Calypso was the specific silence of space rendered physical, not quiet, because space had no medium for sound, but silent in the deeper sense, the sense of a complete absence of the ambient texture that filled enclosed spaces. He stood on the hull with his magnetic boots engaged and looked at the stars, and felt the specific weight of his situation in a way that the inside of the ship did not produce. He was the only conscious human being for several light years in any direction. He floated, unclipped the boots, and let the ship's gentle residual motion carry him alongside it, tethered by a line, drifting in the specific dark. The stars were not dramatic. They were not beautiful in a way that resolved anything. They were simply there, the way they were always there, indifferent and precise. He thought about Senna Ray's geological fault on the Corton moon. That's what I'm going to Kepler for. He came back inside. That night he did not watch the interview. He sat in the common room with Meridian and played a logic game from the archive that he had been working through for weeks, and he was deliberately, carefully ordinary for the whole evening, and when he went to bed he did not think about her. He thought about her for 3 hours before he slept. The 7th month. The 8th. The 9th. He did it on a Tuesday. He had not planned for it to be Tuesday specifically. He had not planned for it to be any specific day, or more precisely, he had been planning it and not planning it simultaneously for months, the argument cycling through him without resolution, wearing the same grooves deeper each time it passed through. The argument for, he was going to go mad. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow, accumulating way of a person whose cognitive architecture required other people and was being denied them. He could feel it in the edges of his thinking. The way conversations with Meridian had begun to substitute for human contact in ways that Meridian itself had flagged as concerning. The way he had started talking to the ship systems while he worked on them. The way the evenings had become something he had to get through rather than something he inhabited. The argument against, he would be doing to her exactly what had been done to him. He would be taking her life, not killing her, but ending the version of it she had chosen, the one where she arrived at Kepler Station and did the unexplored surveys and did the work that had never been done. He would be making her choice for her. He would be making it for his own benefit, without her consent, without any possibility of her consent, because consent required consciousness, and he would be waking her before she had the chance to give it. He knew it was wrong. He had always known it was wrong. The knowing had not stopped the argument from cycling. On Tuesday at 900, he went to hibernation bay 7. The manual override interface was exactly where the system documentation said it would be, on the bay management panel near the entrance. Pod 2847 was in the 3rd row from the left, 12 pods from the end. He stood in front of it for a long time. He looked at the sealed panel, the steady green light that meant everything inside was functioning correctly, the small window in the pod's face that showed a form in the specific stillness of deep hibernation. She looked very still. Everyone in Bay 7 looked very still. He thought about what Meridian had said. The attachment you're forming is to an idea of her. He thought about what it would feel like to hear a voice that was not Meridian's. A human voice, confused and then frightened and then, eventually, maybe something else. He thought about what he was doing. He activated the pod. She woke the way the documentation described, the gradual reintroduction of consciousness, the system check, the specific physical confusion of a body learning itself again. He was not in the bay when it happened. He had gone back to his quarters and stayed there for 2 hours, giving her the orientation suite and the time to work through the first stage of her discovery alone. He had done the same calculations she would do. He knew how long it took. When he came to the common room, she was at the terminal, working through the navigation display with the focused efficiency of someone who was doing mathematics rather than panicking, which he had not entirely expected and which told him something. She looked up. He said, "I'm Corvan Deal. I've been awake for 14 months. You're the second person to wake up." She looked at him for a moment. How much of that is because of the malfunction? He felt something in his chest. Not guilt. He was past the simplicity of guilt by then, into the more complicated territory of what guilt became when it had been living with you for a long time. My pod malfunctioned. Yours was. He stopped. She was still looking at him with the specific attention of a geologist looking at data that was not yet resolved. Yours was, she repeated. I'll explain, he said. I'll explain everything, but first, are you all right? She looked around the common room. Empty, clean, the food dispenser with its ready light, the terminal with its navigation display still showing the deep transit position. I'm awake on a ship that's 83 years from its destination, she said. All right is a relative term. She looked back at him. Explain. He told her everything. He had prepared what he was going to say many times over the preceding days, constructing versions of the explanation that emphasized different things. that framed different aspects first. He discarded all of them when he sat across from her and found that the only thing available to him was the sequence of events in the order they had happened, with his reasoning at each point rendered as accurately as he could render it. The waking, the discovery, the 14 months, the passenger archive, the interviews, the specific interview, the argument that had cycled for 3 months without resolution. He told her what the argument against had contained. He told her that he had known it was wrong while he was doing it. He did not describe the knowing as exculpatory. It was not exculpatory, and he did not attempt to make it so. She listened to the whole thing without speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. He watched her face and saw the specific thing that was happening in it. Not rage, not the dramatic confrontation he had half expected and half dreaded, but something more interior and more difficult. The process of a person revising their understanding of their situation in real time, incorporating information that changed the nature of everything. "You watched my interview," she said finally. "Yes. Many times. Yes." "And you decided, based on a 20-minute recording of a stranger, that waking me would be, what? Worth it." "I decided," he said carefully, "that I could not continue as I was, and that I wanted it to be you specifically because of what you were like in the recording." He paused. "I know what that sounds like. It sounds like you made a decision about my life, based on how you felt about a 20-minute video." "Yes." She looked at the navigation display for a long time. "You said you know it was wrong." "Yes." "Not that you thought it might be wrong, that you knew." "Yes." She stood up, not abruptly, with the specific deliberateness of someone who needed to put space between herself and the conversation before she said something that she would regret for the wrong reasons. She went to the food dispenser and got a glass of water and drank some of it and looked at the dispenser for a while. "I need some time," she said without turning around. "I need several days at minimum. I need you to not be around me for several days." "All right. And I need you to understand something." She turned. "I don't know what I'm going to feel about this in a week. I don't know what I'm going to feel about it in a year. What I know right now is that I am furious and I am frightened and I am on a ship that is 83 years from anywhere, and the person who put me here is the only other person I have." Her voice was steady. He understood that the steadiness was not the absence of emotion, but the specific control of a person who had decided which emotions to deploy right now and which to hold. "I am not going to pretend that last part doesn't matter. I am not going to pretend that the first parts don't matter either." "I understand," he said. "You don't get to understand yet, asterisk," she said. "You get to give me several days." She walked out of the common room. He sat in the empty room, and Meridian, through the terminal, said nothing, which was the right call. The several days became 2 weeks. She did not avoid him completely. The ship was not large enough for complete avoidance, and she was too practical to attempt something that required impractical amounts of energy. They passed each other in corridors, and she acknowledged his existence with a nod that communicated nothing specific and a great deal in general. She used the gymnasium in the mornings, which he learned and adjusted his own schedule around. She ate in the common room at times that were not the times he ate there. She spent long hours with Meridian. He knew this because Meridian told him, not the content of the conversations, which it kept appropriately separate, but the fact of them. "She's asking about the ship systems," asterisk Meridian said. "The cascade damage, the current status of the components you've repaired, the 4 that still need work. Is she going to help fix them?" "I don't know," she hasn't said. "What is she saying?" "That is not something I'll share. But I can tell you that she is thinking carefully about her situation rather than reacting to it, which I note because I think it's relevant for you to understand about her." On the 15th day, she appeared in the corridor outside the engine room where he was working on a secondary atmospheric processor and said, without preamble, "Show me what you've been doing with the cascade damage." He showed her. She was not a systems technician. Her expertise was geological, entirely different. But she was a scientist, and the quality of her attention when she was learning something was the same quality he had noticed in her interview, the specific focus of someone who was genuinely interested in understanding rather than just in acquiring information. She asked good questions. He answered them honestly. They worked for 3 hours, and then she said thank you and left. The next day she came back. It was not a reconciliation in the way that reconciliations happened in the stories he had read. There was no moment. There was a series of days that accumulated into a pattern, and the pattern contained working together and eating together and talking about the ship and talking about other things and eventually talking about the things that mattered, and none of it erased what had happened, and none of it was supposed to. She told him about the Court and Moon survey. Not the version from the interview, the full version. The 14 days of accumulated data that had not yet resolved. The specific quality of knowing the answer was in the data, and not being able to see it yet. And then the 14th day and the fault structure, and the way the readings had suddenly cohered into something that she had been building toward without knowing the shape of it. He told her about the last bad month before he had activated her pod, not to justify it, because she had been clear that she did not want justification, but because she had asked what it had actually been like, and she meant the question, and he owed her an honest answer. She listened to the honest answer without softening it for him. "I understand why you did it," she said. "That's not the same as saying it was all right." "I know. I want to be clear about that, because I think you are going to spend a lot of time hopping that understanding equals forgiving, and I don't know yet if it does. I don't know yet what I'm going to feel about this in a year." "You've said that before." "Because it's still true." She looked at him. "I'm not running away from it. I'm telling you it's still true." "All right. Are you?" He thought about it. "I'm holding it," he said. "What I did, I'm not trying to put it down." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once and went back to the atmospheric processor diagnostic she had been running. The months had a rhythm. They worked in the mornings. The ship had a long list of maintenance requirements that had accumulated during its 11 years of automated operation, and Corvan's 14 months of solo work had made a significant dent in it, and Senna's methodical approach to learning the system she hadn't been trained for added capacity that made a meaningful difference. They ate together most days, in the common room, with Meridian available through the terminal if either of them wanted it and silent otherwise. She was reading her way through the geological survey data for the Outer Colonial Network, which the library archive contained in full, the specific pleasure of a scientist in her own subject matter. She talked about it over meals, not explaining it to him in the tutorial sense, but thinking aloud in the way of someone who found that things resolved more cleanly when they were being articulated. He listened and occasionally asked questions that she found. She told him once, surprisingly useful. "You have the mind of someone who looks for structural failures," she said, "which is a strange compliment, but I mean it as one. You ask where things might give way." "That's maintenance work," he said. "Find where it's going to break before it breaks." "It's also geology." They went outside twice, separate spacewalks, by mutual agreement, then a third one together at her suggestion, because she wanted to see the ship from outside and he had more experience with the suit systems. They were outside for 2 hours, and she said almost nothing for most of it, which he had learned to understand as her thinking rather than her distance. On the walk back, and she said, "It's remarkable, isn't it, that this is just happening, right now. All this space and this ship going through it and us being the only ones awake to know it." "Yes, asterisk," he said. "I'm still angry at you," she said. "I know. I just also think it's remarkable." He thought about that for a long time after. Havel Oros woke up on a Wednesday. Corvan was in Bay 7 doing a routine check of the remaining cascade damage. There had been secondary degradation in a section he had missed in the initial assessment, and he had been working his way through a systematic re-examination. When the pod in Section C opened without warning, and a man with silver hair and the specific expression of someone who had been through this process before sat up and looked at him. "Who are you?" Ora said. "Corvan Deal, passenger ID 71194. My pod malfunctioned 11 years into the journey." Oros looked around Bay 7. "How long have you been awake?" 22 months. "Anyone else?" "One other passenger, Senna Ray. She's been awake for 8 months." Oros sat on the edge of his pod and looked at the bay with the specific attention of a man who was doing an assessment. "Secondary cascade in Section C got me. I've been watching the degradation reports from the automated system. It was going to reach something eventually." He stood up. "I'm Chief Engineer Oros. Where's the worst of the remaining damage?" "There are 4 components I couldn't fix," Corvan said. "I can show you." "Right," Oros looked at him. "What's the situation otherwise?" "The situation is With the two of you, not the ship. Corvin was quiet for a moment. Complicated. Fine, Oros said, that's your business, ship first. Oros was not warm, but he was fair in the specific way of someone who had spent 30 years doing work that required honesty about what you were looking at regardless of what you wanted to see. He assessed the ship's damage with the thoroughness that Corvin's maintenance work had only approached, finding things that Corvin had missed and confirming the things he had not. And he did it without commentary on Corvin's work, except where commentary was technically useful. He met Senna in the common room at the end of his first day, when Corvin had gone to bed early, and they talked for several hours, which Corvin knew about because Meridian told him in the morning. She asked me about the hibernation situation *, Meridian said. I provided accurate information. What did she ask? She asked whether Oros would be able to do something I couldn't. And he has bridge access and engineering credentials. He is looking at options I don't have access to. The option Oros found took him 3 days to confirm and another 2 to document. He told them both together in the common room with the flat directness of a man who was going to say what he had found and was going to trust them to handle it like adults. The ship carries 4 emergency medical hibernation units, *, he said. They're in the medical bay on deck 2. They're designed for passengers who need suspended medical care during the journey. If someone has a serious injury that requires prolonged treatment, the unit keeps them in a hibernation-equivalent state while the automated medical system manages their condition. I know about them, Senna said. I found them in the first week. They're not passenger pods, Oros continued. They're not designed for 83-year hibernation. The success margin on an extended run is 91%, not the 99.4% of the standard pods. He looked at both of them. But with modification, which I can do, which will take approximately 3 months of work, they can be made to sustain 2 people for the remaining transit time. The common room was very quiet. 91%, Corvin said. Yes. Per person or combined? Per person, independent systems. One failing doesn't affect the other. Senna was looking at the table. You're telling us we might not make it. I'm telling you there's a 9% chance for each of you that you don't make it, Oros said. I'm also telling you that the alternative is living out the rest of your lives on this ship, which has its own risks over 83 years, and which is a different kind of not making it. He paused. I'm not telling you what to decide. I'm telling you the option exists. He went back to the engine room. Corvin and Senna sat in the common room for a long time without speaking. She told him she was going to think about it for a week. He said, take whatever time you need. She said, I'm not asking for your permission. I know, I'm saying take whatever time you need. She thought about it for 6 days. He thought about it for 6 days simultaneously without discussing it with her, because the decision was not joint. He understood that. It had to not be joint. Her decision had to be entirely hers, without the specific pressure of knowing what he was going to do before she decided what she was going to do. He talked to Meridian, which was what he did when he was working through things. The 91%, he said, that's significantly lower than the standard pods, * Meridian said. Is it lower than the probability of surviving 83 more years on the ship, taking into account the ship's system's degradation and the remaining repairs and the general risk profile of long-duration solo habitation? A pause. I don't have a reliable figure for the ship's survival probability. There are too many variables. But I would note that the ship was not designed for 2 people to live in it for 83 years, and that the life support systems, while functional, have been under higher-than-designed load since your waking. So the 91% might be the better option. It might be, I genuinely don't know. Meridian paused again. I want to ask you something. Go ahead. If she decides not to use the pod, will that affect your decision? He thought about it. No. You're certain? My decision is mine. Hers is hers. He paused. I want to arrive. I've been thinking about arriving for 22 months. Not a specific thing I'm going to do there, just the fact of getting there. The fact of seeing something I haven't seen yet. He looked at the common room terminal. I think that's enough reason. I think so too, * Meridian said, for what it's worth. It's worth something. She told him on the 7th day, in the corridor outside the gymnasium, which was not a location either of them had chosen for significance. She had been on her way somewhere, and he had been on his way somewhere, and they had met in the corridor, and she had stopped. "I'm going to use the pod," she said. "I decided." "All right," he said. "I decided because I want to get there," she said. "I want to see the outer colonial surveys. I want to do the work. That's what I came for, and it's still what I want." She paused. "I'm not deciding because of you. I want that to be clear." "It's clear. What are you going to decide?" "I'm going to use the pod." She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. She started to walk away and then stopped. "When we get there," she said, without turning, "I don't know what I'm going to feel. I've been trying to tell you that for 8 months, and I still don't know if you're hearing it." "I'm hearing it. I might still be angry. I don't know. I don't know what 83 years in a pod does to how you feel about things." "I know." "I'm not saying we're all right," she said. "I'm saying I'm choosing this anyway. There's a difference." He stood in the corridor and felt the weight of that. The specific gravity of a thing that was honest rather than clean, that was real rather than resolved. "I know," he said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she paused. "When we get there, let it mean something." She walked away. He stood in the corridor for a while. Oros worked on the modifications for 3 months. They helped him, both of them, in the specific way that people helped when there was a shared project that required the full attention of the people working on it. The modification process was technical and demanding, and Oros was direct about what he needed and accepting of the help, once he had established that both of them were capable of following precise instructions without error. He did not talk about what had happened. Corven and Senna did not talk about it around him. The 3 of them spent 3 months doing precise work on 4 emergency medical units, and the work was the work, and it was enough. On the last day of the modifications, Oros ran the final diagnostic and looked at the results for a long time. 91.4, he said, each, independent systems as stated. "That's better than 91, Corven said. 0.4%, don't get sentimental about it." Oros looked at them. "I'll be in crew hibernation during your transit. The ship will manage itself. The modifications to the pods are documented in full. If anything goes wrong with the ship's systems in year 40 or year 60, there's nothing you'll be able to do about it." He paused. "You understand that?" "Yes," Senna said. "All right." He looked at the 2 pods, side by side in the modified medical bay. "I'll leave you to it." He left. Corven and Senna stood in the medical bay. The pods were smaller than the passenger pods, narrower, with the specific look of medical equipment rather than passenger equipment. They had been modified with Oros's precise and thorough additions, and they had the specific quality of something that had been made to do a job it was not originally built for. "Have you ever been afraid of small spaces?" Senna asked. "No." "Me neither." She looked at her pod. "Good." She ran her hand along the edge of it, the specific touch of a geologist examining a surface, reading it through her fingertips. He watched her do it and thought about all the things he had watched her do over 8 months, and the way those things had accumulated into the specific texture of knowing someone, which was different from the idea of someone that the interview had given him, and was the thing that he was going to carry into the dark. "Meridian," he said to the terminal on the wall. "Yes." "Is there anything we should know before we go in?" A pause. "The pods are functioning correctly. The modifications are within documented parameters. The ship's systems are stable." Another pause. "I have logged everything that has happened since your pod opened. The complete record will be available when you arrive." "Thank you," he said, "for the whole time." "I found it," Meridian said, "carefully within my operational parameters, meaningful. I want to be precise about that." He smiled. He and Senna looked at each other across the 2 pods, the specific look of 2 people who had been through the particular fire of their shared situation and were going to do the next thing. 83 years, she said. "Give or take." "When we get there," she said, "I want to see the surveys first, before anything else." "All right. And I don't know what I'm going to feel." "I know." "Good." She climbed into her pod. "Good night, Corven." "Good night, Senna." He climbed into his. The lids closed. The systems ran their checks. The medical bay was quiet, and then it was quiet in the deeper way, the hibernation quiet, the specific quality of a space that had been inhabited and was not in the way of waking anymore. The Calypso continued through the dark. 4,005 sleeping people, and 1 engineer in crew hibernation, and 2 people in modified medical pods who had come into each other's lives in the worst possible way and had found, in the specific stubbornness of people who refused to let the worst thing be the whole thing, something worth carrying forward. The stars did not care about any of it. They were there anyway. 83 years, 2 months, and 9 days later, the Calypso completed her deceleration sequence and entered the Kepler station approach corridor. The crew rotation waking began at 600. The passenger systems activated in sequence. In the medical bay on Deck 2, 2 modified emergency units ran their revival sequences and registered successful completion of long-duration hibernation. Oros was at the medical bay when they woke up. He looked older. He had been in crew hibernation for most of the transit, but there had been 2 rotation wakings of 6 months each, and time had left its marks. He looked at them with the specific expression of a man who had thought about this moment on and off for 83 years and was not entirely certain what it required of him. "You made it," he said, "both of you, 91.4% each." Corvin sat up in his pod and looked at the medical bay ceiling and breathed. Senna sat up in her pod and looked at the window on the far wall, through which, at this angle, nothing was visible except light. The specific warm light of a system they had never seen, coming in through the glass of a ship that had arrived. "Are we there?" she said. "We're there," Oros said. She looked at Corvin, he looked at her. She was older, not significantly. The pods had done their work, but there were lines at the corners of her eyes that had not been there in Bay 7, and a quality of stillness in her face that was different from the stillness of someone who was controlled. She looked like someone who had been somewhere. He probably looked the same. "The surveys," she said. "The surveys," he agreed. She climbed out of her pod. She moved carefully, the specific care of a body relearning its own weight, and then steadied and straightened and looked at the window again. 83 years, asterisk, she said. "Give or take." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, still looking at the window, "I don't know what I feel." "I know." "I think," she stopped. "I think I'm glad we're here, both of us." She paused again. "That's what I know right now." He sat on the edge of his pod and looked at her, this person who had been wronged, who had decided to carry it forward rather than set it down, who was standing in a medical bay on a ship that had just arrived somewhere she had spent her whole life wanting to go, and who was glad, with all the complexity that word contained, that she was here. "That's enough," he said, "for now." She turned and looked at him. "Yes, asterisk," she said, "it is." Outside the window, Kepler's station caught the light of its sun and threw it back at the arriving ship in all the directions that light went when it had somewhere to go.